Well, we kind of skipped ahead 60 years there. So I guess back about the time that you were in radio in Statesville, maybe talk a little bit more about how you met Mom in more detail,
Oh, yeah,
perhaps,
yeah.
and
Yeah,
that whole
okay.
thing,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah, while I was in radio in Statesville, my biggest problem today is I don't have a car, which I can understand I shouldn't have a car, because too many people are driving cars my age, and they think it's not their fault, but they don't realize that the mind is not as quick. There are a lot of good drivers still driving in the 80s and 90s, but I don't know whether I would have been one of them now. I'm 94, and I haven't been driving since our 94 Buick Century was totaled up in Madison. But anyway, that's gone. I'm getting along without a car because I have other ways of transportation. But getting back to how I met Mary at home, I met her the first time at the radio station, and then I stopped in a couple of times. She worked for the county, Iredell County. She was a bookkeeper. She had a good job. She was a smart girl. And I stopped in there one time to see her, and I said, well, we'll have to get together sometime. But I was a little bit leery. I just didn't feel very secure. I wasn't making much money at the radio station, and I wasn't even thinking about marriage, but I thought she would be nice to date. And I don't think she wasn't pushing for marriage either, because she was getting along very good on her own. But the more I saw her, I'd see her now and then and speak and say hello, and I thought she is a pretty girl. But it seemed like it was a gap of about 6 months in between when I saw her, and I finally said, you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to meet your mom and dad. And she said, well, I was wondering if you'd ever get around to that. And so I bought a quart of ice cream, and I think my sister and her husband took care of transportation, and we went up to Salisbury Road to her mom and dad's place. Her mother was Laura Sides, and her dad was Charles Sides, and we sat there and we had ice cream. And I knew from that time on, I thought, well, I'm going to be lonesome without seeing this girl, because she's so pretty. And the dates became more frequent, and finally, it was in 1948. We set a wedding date for February the 14th, 1948, and we got married, and we had a honeymoon in Florida. We were kind of real poor. I mean, neither of us had much money, but we went down there, I think, on a bus, and come back and set up. We lived with her mom and dad on Salisbury Road for a while, and then finally we began getting our money together somehow, and we rented our first apartment on Front Street. And from then on, as Mary Helen kept working all the time. That's the way it was in those days, you know, unless a man was rich enough to afford to, you know, keep his wife. And let's see, we were married in Statesville, and we had our children in Statesville, right? Yeah, we had Gary was born at Davis Hospital, and Ann was born at Iredell Memorial Hospital. So both our children were natives of North Carolina. From there on.
Tell me about your Hudson Terraplane.
What?
Your Hudson Terraplane. When did you get that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. We were needing transportation. I was depending on. Sometimes people accuse me of being, you know, a kibitzer, sort of a slick, borrowing sort of person, borrowing rides, and I did that for a while. But finally, I scraped it up. I think I scraped together about $300 and bought a Terraplane from a fellow. He said, I'm one of your ardent radio listeners. I'm going to sell you my Terraplane for $300.
And when was this?
Pardon?
When was this?
This would be about, pretty well up into, yeah, it was, I would say that was, well, maybe about 4 or 5 months after our marriage. I mean, I needed transportation to get to the radio station. And the Terraplane, it was a lemon, and it would break down in the middle of a square of the city of Statesville, and we'd get written up in the paper that Steady Eddie's Terraplane broke down in the square again. It was getting to be kind of embarrassing, so I asked the guy if he'd buy it back, and he said no. He said, but I'll find a buyer for you. And we got rid of it for almost the same price that I paid for it, but I don't know, I can't remember what the first good car was I really had, but it wasn't. But I have to say the Terraplane did get me out to work many a time.
I remember Mom talking about you got a Chevrolet in 1950 and you couldn't get a deluxe model, so you got another one the next year. You remember that?
Yeah. Now, it was the first car Chevrolet that I got.
That's what she said.
Yeah, and I don't know what happened to that. Do you know what?
Well, she said that you got one in 1950 and you could not get a deluxe model then because of the war and all that.
Yeah.
And then you traded that and got a deluxe model the next year in 51.
Yeah, one year I traded in without Mary Helen knowing. I should have done that. I was taking in one of these slick car places. I was working, this was during the summertime. I was working at a furniture factory then because during this teaching years, you only had 9 months of teaching because the kids worked in the country. And during that 3-month summer, someone said, I know a good car dealer, and they got a beautiful car. And I thought, oh man, I'm going to see that. And I went over to this place, and it was a deluxe looking car. And I was thinking, I don't want to buy that thing. I don't know. I was waiting to talk to Mary Helen about it. They had a plant. They had a guy come up there, and I know now, this guy come up and said, he was whispering something in that salesman's ear. I said, who's that? He said, well, he's waiting to see whether you want that or not. If you don't want that car, he wants it because it's a good buy. And I thought, man, that guy's not going to get this car. And I was a sucker and didn't know it. And I said, well, listen, I'll take that car. I don't want this guy. And later on, I found out it was, it takes a long time to become wise to these tricks. But when I got the car, then I decided that Mary Helen didn't like it. And I thought it was too luxurious. And I was driving to a furniture factory as a laborer, driving this real big luxury car, and I thought that was stupid. And I don't know how I got rid of it, but I did because Mary Helen wasn't happy and I wasn't happy. That's the story about the luxury car. It was a pretty car. I wished I had a picture to put on the screen to show you, but I got suckered into buying that thing.
Okay, how about the transition from radio to teaching? When did that happen and what were the circumstances?
That's right, when I left radio station, I worked at WSIC long enough till, till I could, I just saw we didn't have enough money to live on. So I had a teaching degree, but it had exhausted. It was no longer good unless you renew it. And so Mary Helen and I talked, and I think she was wise enough to say, well, we just can't go on like this. I said, well, I got a teaching degree. So here comes another story you may not believe. I had to go to Women's College up in Greensboro for about 3 weeks. I had to live up there in a women's college with nothing but women, just about 4 of us. And I thought, this is not going to do. Because went into the bathroom, I couldn't find a men's urinal, and a girl outside said, well, what do you expect in a women's college? And then on top of that, these women are running around with almost nothing on. I thought, I've got to get out of here, but I need this degree. And so I managed to get through the 3 weeks, and I got my certificate and got back down to with my degree, and I started teaching at Central High School. That was my first high school, and at Central High School I got my first job.
I think you said you worked in Winston-Salem for a period of time. How did that?
Oh yes, yeah. One time while I was in Statesville, well, someone told me, they said, you're a veteran, and Winston-Salem just taking veterans in like mad. And then I said, well, that's too far away, but I don't want to move us up to Winston-Salem. So what I did, I got a bus early in the morning, and this lasted for about, I guess, well, almost a year, and I kept doing that, and it got sort of hard, but we were making money, and so I decided eventually it was just too much. I mean, I wasn't lazy, but I thought getting up every morning early and then doing that work all day, and I just couldn't take it, so I said, that's when I think I started looking hard for a teaching job. Yeah, I did work for VA, and it was no problem, and if we'd have moved to VA, I might have still been, if we'd have moved to Winston-Salem, we might have still been up there, I might have been living a different life.
Your job in Winston-Salem?
Oh yeah, Winston-Salem, believe it or not, was another filing job. I got up there, pounded a typewriter, And they would have kept me. They wanted me to stay because there was a shortage at that time. I typed letters and I filed, but it was boring. But I was getting, every 2 weeks, I think it was, I'd get that check, and that was the motivation. But with that long ride, and actually I really didn't want to go into teaching because I really wanted to get into the radio, but I never had training in radio. I was self-taught in radio. If I'd have gone taking a degree in journalism, I might have stayed in radio all my life. And maybe I'm not doing it for fame, but I love news and I love to talk to people. And I might have been on a network, but I didn't have that talent. So I ended up teaching and by the way, I retired from St. Stephen's in Hickory in the summer of, when school's out in 1977. So figure from 77 till the year 2008, how many years I've been retired. If you want to get your math out, that's a long time. Yeah. And I could mention all the nice times that Gary and Gail took Mary Helen and I up to Boone and took us down to New Orleans. And I won't mention a trip that Gail took the little boys on one time up some of the parts of New Orleans. Do you remember that? Where the little boys saw some people sitting on the steps and wanted to know what they were doing. And you said they were there to entertain the people. And I said, okay, cool. Do you remember that? I wrote a story about that, and people here just couldn't get enough of that. They said, do you mean those little boys were asking questions? They didn't know. And I said, no, they were too young to know what those ladies are doing up there. But that's a true story, because Mary Helen told me about that. She said, I almost died when see, Gary and Mary Helen and I went a different direction, and you took them up. It was a real pretty street, all those lights and everything, but there were things going on in a street that you didn't know was going to be going on. Do you remember that?
No, I don't.
Well, that's not a made-up story, but Mary Helen remembers it. So, do you boys remember that? How old were you when we went to New Orleans? How old were those boys? About 9 and 7?
Yeah, it was just before my 9th birthday.
Before your 9th birthday? Yeah, good.
7.
See, I guess that's right. And how old was he?
7.
7. Yeah. See, in a story, I guess it's 7 and 9 years old. So at that age, boys are curious, and you can't blame them.
Okay, well, back to 1950 again.
Yeah, okay.
Keeps like to jump
Yeah.
ahead 30
Yeah.
years.
You were in an apartment on Front Street. What were the circumstances of moving from there?
Oh, yeah. Well, for one thing, we didn't like something that woman was doing. I think I don't know what was wrong with her. She made some excuse to get us out. I think she might have been, I don't know whether she wanted to go up there. Rent was too high and we didn't want to do it or not, but she had some excuse to get us out. So when we moved from Front Street, where did we go? Oh, then we bought our first home. Up on, what was the name of that street we bought our first home? Remember
Georgia
that?
Avenue.
What?
Georgia Avenue.
Yeah. And that was a GI loan. That's the first time I used a GI. I never got a chance to use in college when I went to the women's college in Greensboro, I had government paid for that. But our first GI loan was in a house up there, and I liked that house. And the only reason we moved from that house, we moved from there to another house, in a better house on, what street was that?
Drive.
What?
Holland Drive.
Holland Drive, yeah, Holland Drive was a real nice place. We lived there for a long time. And the only reason we moved from Statesville altogether was I just ran out of schools where I could be effective, because I was a typing teacher, and I'd have to take a job where they wanted to set up a typing class, and I did a fine job and say, oh, they're great, these kids, all that. But they'd give me subjects like math, science, and the stuff that I wasn't trained in. I said, I just can't. So I found out about a job. A fellow named Bill Guy was a principal up in some school up in Hickory. I forget the school he's in, but he said he tipped me off. He said, I know circumstance you're in. He said, you're good. He said, I know you had discipline problems. He said, I think it's mainly because you're teaching subjects you don't not qualified. He said, but there's an opening in a big new school called St. Stephen's up here in Wedbury is the principal. And I went up there for an interview, and he liked me and I liked him. And that's how I got to Hickory until I retired. And then, of course, Wedbury stayed at another school, and we opened up the new St. Stephen's School, and Charles Boss was my new principal. And he's the last man I worked for, Charles Boss. And my son and daughter both went to school while I was there.